Trump says Fed pick Warsh can get economy to at 15% growth, which, by the way, I know you guys, this sounds like a good story, but there's many arguments to it. Rob, go ahead and play this clip. Look, I'm going to come to you first.
And everybody else for years. And they say, 3% growth. Oh, this is great. GDP. 3% GDP. 2.5%. They're very happy. 2.5%. 2%. 1%. They're happy with anything. We should grow 15 or 20%. Larry, every time we're growing, they stop it by announcing that, we're going to raise interest rates and stuff. So we're going to do 5.4%. It was announced with a Democratic shutdown, which cost us at least 1.5 points, okay? People don't realize we could have been at 7%. We should be at 15%. I'll tell you, if our new head of the Fed, who I think is going to be great, and he's a really high quality person. He was and your friend Kevin was great, but I want to keep him with us too. I said to King, look, I had the two Kevins, right? But I wanted to keep him with us. He's doing great. But if he does the job that he's capable, we can grow at 15%. I think more than that.
Well, 15 is a big number, sir.
But Larry, you can do it. The problem is every time we used to grow at 15%, and when we were starting as a country, we were growing.
Yes.
Because we had spirit and we had the right incentives. Today we have a lot of socialism, a lot of communism. We have a lot of bad things. But there's no.
You can pause it
we
right
did
there.
5.
So, Luke, what concerns you about this, and what excites you about it?
I think the 15% number on an absolute number is probably a little bit of Trump being Trump, which is to say, everything is superlatives. However, I think he's getting at what the game plan is. I think one of the great charms, in my opinion, of Trump is he will often tell you what the plan is. Even sometimes when he shouldn't, he does. And I agree that we are in a Western sovereign debt crisis, that we have a debt problem, we have a deficit problem. There's two ways out of it. You either default on the debt, which is simply not possible, or you financially repress the debt, you devalue the currency. And so what I think Trump is telling us is that we're going to run a version of the playbook that we ran in World War II. So during World War II, we ran debt to GDP up to 110%. And from 1945 to 1951, debt to GDP fell from 110% to 55% in just 5 years. How did we do that? Simple. We grew rapidly. We had yield curve control, which is to say the Fed went to Treasury and said, we will buy every 3-month T-bill you offer at 0.3%, no questions asked. We will buy every 10-year Treasury you offer at 2.5%, no questions asked. They kept those yields there, and they printed as much money as they needed to. And U.S. inflation took off, and U.S. real rates, which is the, say, nominal GDP growth minus inflation, real rates were negative 13% at the lows. Yeah, so basically, we inflated the debt away, and ultimately, we grew nominally probably at 15 or 20 or 25%. And fast forward to 2020 in COVID. We ran a very similar version of that playbook. If you look at the U.S. debt to GDP, it peaked at about 130% around mid-2020. It fell down to about 115% in under a year. How did we do that? Simple. We grew GDP at about 12 to 15% nominally, with about 8 to 10% inflation in that number, and the Fed was buying hundreds of billions of dollars of bonds at basically zero. And so when he talks about Warsh and he talks about 15%, I think they understand they are in a corner. The only way out of this is of another version of that, where they are going to run this economy extremely hot, and you're going to have high growth.
Good thing for the average person?
First of all,
hang on, Pete. Hang on. Is this going to be beneficial to the average person? Who does this benefit?
So there's winners and losers in any choice, of course, right? So the winner over the last 50 years of financialization have been bondholders, Wall Street, Washington deficits. The loser has been the middle and working class of America, the wage earner.
Right.
To my eyes, what the Trump administration appears to be doing is trying to reverse that. Listen to what Scott Bessent has said repeatedly. It's a time for Main Street, not Wall Street. Yep. Wall Street will still do okay, but Main Street will do well. Look at immigration policy. They are intentional, regardless of how one feels about it politically. The fact is they are removing supplies of blue collar labor from this country that has kept a cap on wages. And now they bring in a Fed chair that he says is going to grow GDP 15%. They ultimately, what I think they're trying to do is flip the script versus the last 50 years, which is wages are going to rise. They're going to try to run the Henry Ford model, which is to say Henry Ford famously said, I pay my workers more than I need to because I want them to be able to afford to buy the Model Ts coming off the line, because that is a sustainable, that's a sustainable economic model. Hold on, let me finish, Peter. The Trade Representative Jamison Greer at Davos, in a speech, is fascinating. He gave a speech at Davos. All the speeches that came out at Davos 3 weeks ago got a lot of press time. His was not picked up by Financial Times. It was not picked up by the Wall Street Journal. It was not picked up by Bloomberg. The only one that picked it up was Fox News, and just a blurb. He came out and said exactly this. We are going back to a system where we are going to benefit the working class, basically a more sustainable system. So the winners are going to be wages. The losers are going to be the bondholders on a real basis. They're going to get paid every dollar their own, but we're going to have a period of the economy's going to grow
Peter,
hot.
do you agree?
Yeah, okay, no, I don't agree with pretty much
tell us.
just about any of this stuff. So let's get back to reality. But just first to make a side point, because I don't like hearing the nonsense about Henry Ford. So the reason that Ford paid workers $5 a day was not so they could buy his cars. That would be nonsense. The reason he did that was to retain workers. There was a lot of turnover, and Ford invested a lot to train his workers on the assembly line. So in order to retain workers and reduce turnover, he paid higher wages, which and Ford workers back then in real terms were making a lot more than they're making today. And of course, back then they paid no income taxes, they paid no Social Security taxes. So it was good to be a worker in America before the government screwed up our economy. But I want to get to this idea that we're just somehow going to replay what happened after the Second World War. So first of all, we ran up a lot of debt during the Second World War. Now, one thing that happened during the Second World War was we introduced the withholding tax, and we pretty much tripled the income tax. So vast majority of Americans paid no income taxes at all prior to the Second World War. They started paying during the war to pay for the war. Now, when the war ended and we demobilized all the troops and we stopped the fighting, the government never got rid of the income tax. They never reversed the tax hikes that were implemented to pay for the war. So the government had all of this revenue coming in that it didn't have before from taxpayers. And that also helped to bring down the debt relative to GDP. And yes, we did create a lot of inflation during the 1960s that manifested itself in the 1970s that also helped to bring it down. But back then, America was a completely different country than we are today. We were the world's biggest creditor nation. We were the world's biggest exporter of manufactured goods. We had huge trade surpluses. We were still a solvent nation. Today, we're completely broke. We're the world's biggest debtor nation. We have massive trade deficits. We have no savings. We're not increasing taxes the way we hiked them during the Second World War. We've recently cut taxes. Meanwhile, we've already bled the typical American household dry. They have all this debt. People didn't have credit card debt in the 1950s. They didn't have all these student loans. Student loans didn't even exist back then. So Americans are drowning in debt. They have no ability to pay higher taxes to reduce these deficits. I agree with one thing that you said. We're going to try to inflate them away. But the biggest losers in this inflation are not just going to be bondholders, but wage earners. The average American is going to see the value of his savings and his wages completely eviscerated by the inflation that's about to hit. And what's going to happen, too, is decades of the inflation that we exported, because we took a lot of the money that we printed and we sent it abroad. And our creditors, instead of buying our products, which didn't exist, they bought our financial assets. And that whole thing is going to be reversing. So the world is going to be selling U.S. bonds, U.S. stocks, raising U.S. dollars. All those dollars are going to come home, bidding up non-existent good prices. So all the inflation is going to move out of financial assets. So yes, Wall Street is going to lose, but all the inflation is going to move into consumer goods. So Main Street is going to lose too. Everybody in America is going to lose. The only winners will be the people who got out of Dodge. So Americans who read the writing on the wall and who divested of U.S. financial assets, got into foreign stocks, got into foreign bonds, got into precious metals and other inflation hedges, yes, they'll win. They'll win as investors. They'll lose as Americans, but they'll make a lot of money off of the collapse of this bubble economy that has been inflating for decades. And I've been warning about it for decades because I understood the fundamental problems. These are the problems that led me to accurately forecast the 2008 financial crisis, because I understood all the mistakes that the Fed made to make that crisis inevitable. But I also understood the even bigger mistakes that they've made since the 2008 financial crisis, and including the mistakes that Walsh is going to make once he takes over from Powell.
All right.
If they inflate away you said they don't have savings, but then you said they're going to get their savings inflated away.
Those who do have savings, there are some Americans, baby boomers, that still have savings. Yes, there are others that only have debt. And sure, their debt is going to get inflated away. But whenever somebody's debt gets inflated away, that's somebody else's asset. Somebody is depending on that debt as their asset. So we're going to wipe out a lot of the financial assets of Americans. But when we wipe out a lot of the debt,
which
sure,
Americans though?
The Americans that own the bonds are going to get wiped out. People that own the mortgages.
Which Americans are those?
Well, maybe
roughly what percent of income strata do they?
Oh, higher income, but also, there are lower income Americans that have insurance, that have people have life insurance policies that have cash value that are going to get wiped out.
Let me hear what he has to say. I want to hear your thoughts on why you're asking that question.
The reason I ask that is because one of the big problems everyone identifies, we have a K-shaped economy, right?
Sure.
We have the record wealth inequality. The only way to fix that at some point is for something to happen that narrows these. Okay. And we're heading on a path where what we're going to do is
rich get richer, poor get poor.
I agree.
Right. That's going to we can keep this going, and in which case the currency will ultimately get destroyed, or we can implement some policies that allow wages to rise in this country, let profit dollars rise, but profit margins shrink.
I agree.
And that would, right?
I agree.
So you get rid of a guy, if this guy's in debt to this guy, which is Peter's right, that's how it is. And this guy's debt gets inflated away, and which means this guy's asset gets inflated away. That's how you start closing the K.
Yeah, this is not, look, yes, the wealth gap is going to close. The rich are going to get poorer, and the poor are going to get poorer too. But the rich are going to get poorer faster than the poor. So if you think that's a good thing, that we're going to narrow the wealth gap by everybody getting poorer, well, but I would rather do it another way, right? But unfortunately, that is not the way this is going to happen. And the biggest problem for the average American is going to be the complete unaffordability of just about everything that we now take for granted. Because all these products
Peter, I got to get through other people as well, Peter.
Are going to be too expensive for most Americans to buy.
So one of the things I think we have to remember is when people talk about our debt, where is our debt? Only right now today, posted 28% of our debt is owned internationally. The rest is owned by us. The Social Security Trust Fund, the Fed owns, 18 to 21% of the total debt today. So it's money we owe ourselves, which has devalued our dollar. So when we think about the debt, it's not like there's this big boogeyman internationally that we have to all pay. What is happening is it's going to affect the value of the dollar that we carry. And that's what people need to understand. The average person is the reason that your house costs twice as much, and your parents are happy because they call it equity. You call it unaffordability because you're 25 years old with a college degree and you're trying to start. Well, that was happened because we printed more dollars, and if there's more of something, it's less valuable. If there's one Michael Jordan rookie card, it's $5 million. If there's 1,000 Michael Jordan rookie cards, they're $5,000. That's the way the average person should be thinking about our money, right? Is how much of it's out there. And the total debt we have, we owe almost 80% of it to ourselves, which is affecting the value of our dollar and the affordability. And what these men are talking about in technical terms, from two different perspectives, is how that's going to shake out to remedy. And the remedy is, as they say, chemotherapy almost killed me. Well, guess what? That's kind of what's going to happen with the economy.
Yeah, but owing it to ourselves, doesn't mean it's not a problem, because,
No, it is, because it affects the value of that dollar and what we can do with it.
Well, the dollar is going to go down in value regardless. But the fact that we owe the majority of our debt, some Americans owe it to other Americans, doesn't make that any less of a problem.
Social Security Trust Fund.
And look, the Social Security Trust Funds are basically worthless because all they have is U.S. government bonds. And the U.S. government owes that money to itself.
I'm going to get to the next story.
22%.
I'm going to get to the next
Yeah,
story.
but-
Okay. When we set out to create a shoe that blends comfort, function, and luxury, we had the choice to make it fast. We had the choice to make it cheap. We chose neither. Instead, we chose Tuscany, Italy. We chose true Italian craftsmanship, each pair touched by 50 skilled hands. We chose patience, spending 2 years perfecting every detail, and we chose the finest quality at every step. Introducing the Future Looks Bright collection. Not rushed, not disposable, not ordinary. Rather, intentional, luxurious, timeless. If you enjoyed this video, you want to watch more videos like this, click here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click here.